بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على نبيه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا مزيدا إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. We spoke about many spiritual aspects of Ramadan and we'll continue to do so inshallah ta'ala. However, just as Ramadan was the month of worship, it was also the month of some of the greatest Islamic victories. And some very important historical events occurred in Ramadan. The victory of Badr, the one that's called in the Quran the criterion, the mark between the truth and the evil, يوم الفرقان يوم التقى الجمعان, the battle that Allah honored Islam with, took place in Ramadan. The conquest of all conquests, إِنَّا فَتَحْنَا لَكَ فَتْحًا مُبِينًا, took place in Ramadan, the entry to Mecca. The battle of Ain Jalut and many other historical events took place in Ramadan. And one of the greatest Islamic victories after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba was a great victory that took place in Ramadan 92 years after the Hijrah. The great victory that many Muslims don't know about, especially the young youth growing up now. And the others, many of the others who do know about it don't take pride in it. The roots of it was during Uthman ibn Affan's time. He attempted to conquer Constantinople, but he wasn't able to. In Al-Tabari, in Ibn Kathir, in Al-Humyari says, historians that wrote, they said when Uthman wasn't able to enter Constantinople, which is Constantinople, he gave advice as to how it would be open. He says it needs to be open through the waters. You can only get there through the waters. That was the goal of many Muslim leaders, and it was an honor for them to go and conquer Constantinople. Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh said, whoever conquers Constantinople, Spain, Andalus, will be a partner in reward for whoever conquers Constantinople. Why? Why did he say that? Because it's the path to Constantinople. When the Muslims reached North Africa by Maghrib, Morocco, there was a governor there in North Africa called Musa ibn Nusayr. He was born during the time of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, one of the greatest Islamic heroes. He wanted to expand, and there was two directions they could go: desert, or they could go through to Andalus. And they chose Andalus because they want to liberate people and deal with people. Muslims deal with people, not with sand. So he wanted to conquer Andalus, but he faced many obstacles and difficulties. First of all, the water. There's 13 kilometers they got to cross in water before they get to Andalus, him and his army. And they didn't have ships. He was also facing the obstacle of crusaders on islands behind them. Before he gets to the main enemy, they got little islands behind them where he feared they may attack him from the back if he reached Andalus. He also didn't have enough Muslim soldiers to face the massive crusader army. And also, he had no idea about the geographic details in Andalus. But he was determined. And those obstacles and more only made him even more determined. And that's when he began to build ships. He learned that from Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan radiallahu anh, because he lived around Muawiyah and he's seen how they built ships around him. His father was a close friend of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiallahu anh. He began to build the ships 88 years after the Hijrah, which would be about 706 in the Western calendar. But if you look at Musa ibn Nusayr, his biggest accomplishment in preparing was teaching Muslims Islam, especially the new reverts. Don't minimize the structured teaching of Islam. That's the path to victory. Without it, many get moved by emotions, and he could have done so. If you look at Nuruddin, in the category of Nuruddin, they prepared men through knowledge and halaqat. Many don't know those people. Salah ad-Din didn't just wake up one day and take an army and go and fight the crusaders. There was a lot of work done behind the scenes that many don't know about, of teaching Islam, Quran, Hadith, Fiqh, Usul, everything, Tajweed. Musa ibn Nusayr established intensive Islamic study. What would you call courses today? To teach the non-Arab, the Barbar Amazigh. He wanted to teach them. He wanted Islam fully rooted in their hearts. The Barbar Amazigh are among the most difficult people to deal with. And they're very difficult, more difficult to change. But by the will of Allah and the strategy of these halaqat, they changed. In fact, you see the effect of that change generations after that. When the French occupied Algeria for 130 years, they tried to get them away from their religion in every possible way they could. But during that time, and after that time, they were more firm and enthusiastic and loyal to Islam than they were before the occupation. Musa ibn Nusayr taught the Amazigh Islam, Aqidah, Tawheed, Fiqh, through structured curriculum. It was very easy for Musa to give a couple of fiery khutbahs and move the masses by emotion, and they probably could have got victory like that. He could have inspired them and got victory like that. But what happens? Over time, emotions fade and evaporate and change. And you don't want men led solely by emotions. After the structure, the foundation, then yes, emotions. And that's the epidemic today. The Berber who were only 5 years ago, men who fought Islam, were now soldiers prepared to do one of the greatest conquests in the history of Islam. Musa ibn Nusayr chooses a general and another hero, Tariq ibn Ziyad, a man who died 102 years after the Hijrah. Tariq ibn Ziyad wasn't even an Arab. He was a Berber Amazigh. Musa ibn Nusayr put him over other Arab. Why? Because Musa knew and believed wholeheartedly this Arab and non-Arab issue doesn't work with him. Tribalism, nationalism, secularism, racism, that doesn't work. It's La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Not only was Tariq a non-Arab, but he was a revert. A revert. He embraced Islam on the hands of Musa ibn Nusayr. A revert. He was a revert. A revert raised by Musa ibn Nusayr. Over 15 years ago, I said that legends raise legends and cowards raise cowards. That's the general rule. There's some exceptions, but rules are based on exceptions. Today you see Western deluded sellouts raising their legs. Western deluded sellouts produce Western deluded sellouts. And that's an epidemic. So legends raise legends and cowards raise cowards. A non-Arab, a revert, an ex-slave. But on today's standards, Tariq ibn Ziyad was a alim. He memorized the Quran. Tariq ibn Ziyad memorized the Quran at a young age and he learned fiqh. This is specified. I'm not saying it based on assumption because of what he did. I'm saying this based on what history said about him. Tariq ibn Ziyad in Ramadan of 92 years after the Hijrah took an army of 12,000. Some say 18,000. I believe it's really 12,000. They crossed the waters, and as soon as they landed, he gave an eloquent long speech starting off, أيها الناس أين المفر البحر من ورائكم والعدو أمامكم وليس لكم الله إلا الصدق والصبر. Oh people, where are you going to flee to? The waters behind you, the oceans behind you, the enemies in front of you. All you have is to be truthful with Allah and be patient. Some of the more recent, not recent, but more recent books, history books say that he burned the ships in order to avoid that anyone flee and that so they'll be determined. But I believe that's exaggeration because I read the original books on Al-Andalus and what happened there, and the early first generation books who wrote about this, none of them state this fact. And it's such a huge fact, they mentioned more details than this. And this is not mentioned, so I assume it didn't happen. Tariq fought many battles, Ma'arakat Shuda, and then the final one was Bawadi, which was on the 28th Ramadan of 92 years after the Hijrah. And 9,000 of his troops were Berber Amazigh, and the rest were Arab. 3,000 Muwahideen generously irrigated the precious lands of Al-Andalus with their blood. In the middle, Tariq had covenants with them. And there wasn't a single covenant or promise that he did, even with those he was fighting, that he breached. In fact, the Crusaders were forcing Jews living under their rule at the age of 7 to turn to Christianity. And they were confiscating their property. So he was to the Jews a hero, a liberator. If the ignorant knew the justice of Islam and Allah's rule on this earth, they would be the first to call for it. You'd even be more amazed at how Muslims treated the Jews at the downfall 800 years after this country was taken away. They went to extreme measures to preserve the life of the Jews who were under the Muslim rule, Ahl al-Dhimma. Compare that when they got the upper hand. When Muslims went to the lands, they went to liberate them from oppression, because Muslims are in charge of mankind. Allah put Muslims in charge of mankind. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. Never did they force anyone to say La ilaha illallah. Never. How dare anyone force anyone, a Muslim, force anyone to say La ilaha illallah when we believe as a principle of Islam his La ilaha illallah is not accepted. Anyone who's forced or even coerced or pressured, his La ilaha illallah is not accepted. La ikraha fi d-din. Many proofs on that. Let me tell you who really forced others to embrace another religion. When a country imposes on another country to change their Islamic curriculum, to take stuff out of their curriculum in the name of getting along with others, in the name of democracy, those who spend billions to spread interfaith, a religion, a whole interfaith is the religion, is the kufr religion, to embrace interfaith, that's who's forcing people to embrace another religion. Many battles continued after 92 years after Hijrah. In 93 after Hijrah, it was Ubur Tali'at Musa. In 94 years after the Hijrah, Marda, Fath Marda. These were in Ramadan too, in 93, 94. Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr were ordered at a point to stop their advance because the deputy Khalifa at the time, Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik, the Khalifa back then was Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik. He was on his deathbed. Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik wanted them to slow their pace down so the leader, the Khalifa, can die and the conquest will be attributed to his name. But Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad kept advancing. They didn't listen to him. When Sulaiman was finally the Khalifa, he harmed both of them very badly. He harmed and oppressed Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad very badly. They say that Musa ibn Nusayr made up with him later on. And in fact, he took Musa ibn Nusayr to Hajj. But Tariq ibn Ziyad lived a lonely life after the conquest. He returned to Syria, to Damascus. And he lived lonely and secluded, away from the spotlight, away from politics, away from everything. What melts the heart is he lived not only a lonely life, but some more books that I read and said that he was found dead in front of a masjid alone. And prior to that, he was spotted begging. They left him alone. Even though Tariq ibn Ziyad was worthy of being the governor on Andalus. Just like Amr ibn al-As was the governor on Egypt. Amr ibn al-As conquered Egypt, he was the governor there. He was worthy of being the governor in Andalus. But he was a man sincere with Allah. He didn't care about the spotlight. He turned and went on his own and died a lone life. But the world changed after the conquest of Andalus. The world. We seen men pop up like Ibn Khaldun, Zahrawi, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Hazm, and other scholars in geography, in space, in engineering, in math, in every field, and most importantly, in the many Islamic sciences, in every Islamic science you can imagine. It started in Spain and it affected all of Europe. A French writer writes about this, a non-Muslim French writer writes about this. He said Muslims changed the region. He mentioned an example, or a few examples, and one of them that I remember was that the Muslims made a lot of Europe civilized. He said women in northern part of Europe, they were called the Saqaliba, they used to cut their hands and their faces with knives and harm themselves when they were widowed. Some of them went to an extreme of hanging themselves when they were widowed to show their love for their husbands, and they would then burn the husband and the wife and bury them in the same grave. When they seen how Muslims dealt with matters like this, they changed. Islam went to liberate, to remove oppression. Islam went to make them humans. They were in an area where this Frenchman writes, he said they didn't take a shower but once or twice a year. It's a ritual or a belief, I can't remember what he said. When they seen the Muslims making wudu 5 times and bathe regularly, it changed. They taught them how to clean. They taught them how to deal with one another. They taught them the attitude amongst each other. They taught them about mercy. It's amazing to read that Muslims installed streetlights back then. It's amazing to read that Muslims decorated the avenues, the main avenues of Andalus with flowers and trees. It came to a peak with Abdurrahman al-Nasir, the leader, Abdurrahman al-Nasir, when he took leadership. And he became very popular and very strong. And he had effect on everyone. In fact, in 1961, the non-Muslims, on the 1000th anniversary of his death, celebrated his achievements and accomplishments that overwhelmed the whole region, in honor and respect to him. And many Muslims wouldn't even know who this guy is. What's sad is that our bright ummah's legacy has been forgotten. And that brings about a defeatist mentality. Surrenderous cowards. In Qurtuba, there was a library, the biggest in the world. The biggest in the world. It had 500,000 books in it. They didn't have copy machines and printers back then. 500,000 books in a library, the biggest of its time. If there was a library bigger than that, it would have been the one in Iraq, the one also owned by Muslims, under the rule of Muslims, in Baghdad in Iraq, the one that the Tatar took the books and poured them in the ocean of Dijla, to the point that it changed the color of Dijla. There was also Dar al-Hikmah in Al-Qahira, another huge library. Those were the only three major ones back then, but the one in Qahira died in history. When they entered Andalus, the Crusaders, one of the first things they did is burn the books. A bishop named Qambis, with his hatred to Islam, when they conquered Andalus, took 80,000 books to the public square of Qurtuba and burnt them all in one day. Then in 646 after the Hijrah, they burned the rest of the books for the Muslims. Why? Because they knew affirmatively, they knew that this is what uplifts this ummah. Knowledge. And mainly, we're talking about the knowledge of the Sharia and the sciences of Islam. As long as they have this knowledge, this ummah will remain strong. They wanted to, or thought they can take the ummah away from this knowledge, away from its roots, by burning their books. But little did they know, the outline for the ummah is in our hearts, in our breast, and that they can never get to. It's not on ink and paper, it's in our hearts. As time went by, the Muslims began to go astray. They went astray from the teachings that Allah gave him victory for. From competing over memorizing the Quran and Bukhari and Muslim, and competing over knowledge, it was now competing over girls. From filling the houses of Allah and the halaqat, to now spider webs on the house of Allah and the halaqat, and clubs being livened up. There was a generation now that had a deficiency in tawheed and wala and bara and fiqh and Islamic sciences, which divided the Islamic ummah in Andalus to 22 kings. Just like the Muslim world today. I think today is 22. The same thing. They had 22 kings back then. One of the leaders, Ibn al-Ahmar, he was a king in Andalus. He brought non-Muslims to fight his opponent, his Muslim brother in Islam, called Ibn Hud. Ibn Hud, in return, gave those non-Muslims 30 of his strongholds to side with him against Ibn al-Ahmar. The final king of Spain, Abu Abdullah al-Saghir. He once blocked a Muslim army that was heading to the territory of Malqa to have Muslims there that were besieged by the Crusaders. When the Crusaders defeated the Muslims, because he blocked the army going to help the Muslims, they changed a masjid into a church. Abu Abdullah al-Saghir sent them a letter congratulating them on the victory. He thought he was scoring points with them. They promised him. He thought they were going to keep him in power. He thought that's how victory and honor is achieved. فَتَرَى الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ يُسَارِعُونَ فِيهِ. That's the disease of the hearts. He sought victory by putting his faith in the hands of the enemy over his brothers. He did get temporary victory. Temporary. He did seek honor in them. But when you seek honor in other than Allah, your end is humiliation. Definite humiliation. Right after they used him, and they made him think he's going to remain in power, they turned on him and took over his territory. Abu Abdullah al-Saghir, the last king in Spain, surrendered the final stronghold in Gharnata. He gave it to the Crusaders. Then he walked in on his mother crying, and his mother told him the famous quote, "Ibki mithla nisa'i mulkan lam tuhafidh alayhi mithla rijal." Cry on a kingdom you didn't save like a man. The famous poet wrote about this. Andalus is occupied territory just like Palestine is occupied territory. Abu al-Baqa al-Randi, the famous poet from Andalus, he spoke in a long poem about Andalus and how it was, and the knowledge there, and the beauty of it, how the whole world, the non-Muslims, used to go there to learn, and how the massacre of the Crusader was, and how the traitors of the Ummah was, and how Muslims neglected each other, how the young beautiful girls were raped by the Crusaders. And then finally, he says at the end of it, at the end of the poem, he says, لمثل هذا يذوب القلب من كمد إن كان في القلب إسلام وإيمان. To like this and like this, a heart melts if there's any Islam and Iman in heart. That which Allah gave them victory in 92 years after the Hijrah, that which Allah gave them victory with, which is they're holding and clinging on the rope of Allah, that which Allah gave them victory with, they were defeated when they left it in the month of Ramadan as well. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.